Hello, I'm John Kane, and I welcome you to Let's Talk Native on this Sunday, special night, Sunday, August 18th. While this program may not provide a path to spiritual enlightenment, we do encourage and in some cases start conversations. We don't do prayers or buffalo speeches. We take a tough look at our history, oppression, survival. We talk about culture, the arts, politics, and identity. And we may step on a few toes along the way, but our real goal here is to bring people together by breaking down what separates us. We will take on the false narratives and provide critical thinking to all that is heaped upon us. And we do it all right here from the Cattaraugus territory of the Seneca Nation. Live from the Cattaraugus territory of the Seneca Nation. So let's talk native. But first, let me remind people that our audio streams at www.letstalknative.com. We stream live video of the show on our Facebook group pages via Facebook Live. Our shows are available as podcasts on your favorite podcast platforms right after the show. And we take video from our Facebook Live stream and we put it up on our YouTube channel, which is Let's Talk Native TV. I encourage you to subscribe both to our podcast and, again, whatever platform you're comfortable with or that you normally use. And I encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. And that way you'll catch not only videos of this show, the show that I do in New York, as well as some of our short form videos that we do. So I encourage you to again, sign up for it. That way you'll get notifications. I had a couple of people get a hold of me from my New York show saying they weren't sure how to find my show. So that's the best way to do it. All right. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals upheld the right for North Dakota to strip voting rights away from Native people. And it's in a very kind of specific circumstance, but it's definitely worth noting. And they say that that it only affects about 10% of the population, the Native population. But here's what it's about. What they're saying is that if you can't put a physical address on your voter registration form, if you don't let the state of North Dakota anyway, and I don't know how many other states have this requirement, but I know when you fill out a voter registration form, you have to put your address. North Dakota is saying if it's not a physical address, a physical residential address, then we're going to reject your voter registration form. So in other words, if you don't have a house number, and this is the thing, in many Native peoples, and not just North Dakota, but many territories, they don't even have street names, let alone house numbers. And there's a variety of reasons. Some, are valid reasons. Some are just kind of a pushback against conformity. But there are many reasons for not wanting street signs on your territory or house numbers on your territory. That idea of conforming to what is the system out there is somehow not necessarily embraced. It's crazy that you'll embrace the idea of voting in an election, but you won't embrace the idea of having a house number. But of course, some people have that choice. In other places, they simply never provided Native territories the infrastructure to provide street names and house numbers and physical addresses. So all those people who can't put a physical address down on their a physical residential address, a legal physical residential address on a voter registration form, are being denied the right to vote. Now, of course, my view on this thing. My view on this thing is good. We shouldn't be voting in their elections anyway. That's not exactly what everybody expects to hear, especially from a Native activist. But this is the conversation that we've had here on the show before. So we're going to revisit all the reasons not to vote again. Not the least of which is they don't really want our vote anyway. And in this situation, I think we can actually spin this a little bit. I think the whole idea is say, North Dakota, you don't want us to vote? That's fine. We don't want to vote in your freaking elections anyway. But you know what? While you're stripping those voting rights away, let's strip some of the other stuff that you're imposing upon us. I mean, and I think you can play that. I think there's a PR play here, a strategic play. And it may not necessarily result in major change. It probably just gets them to change their voter rules. But again, I think this is this whole idea of establishing what our distinction is. It's kind of a carry on from my last show, the us and them. There's no reason that they need to have our physical address on a voter registration form. And I'll get into what's problematic about that as I go through some of the list of the reasons not to vote. But obviously, here's the first one. Our numbers are so small. We represent less than 1% of the U.S. population. It's something like less than 0.7%. And if you talk about those of us who live on native territories, you can cut that number in a half, or maybe even only a third of that number. So now you're talking about only a couple of tenths of a percent of people living on a native territory in the overall population around us. So honestly, do you think Pine Ridge or Seneca Nation or, Onondaga, any place like that, that the voter turnout is going to change an election? And here's the other thing. We're in a unique situation a little bit here as Native people who are surrounded by New York, because New York is is pretty much it's a given. It's going to vote Democratic in the national contest. Of course, there are the congressional seats and, of course, the state seats and that kind of stuff, where there are strong pockets of right-wing Republican, strongholds, as they call them. And here in Western New York, and in fact, if you any place away from the big cities, you're going to find a fairly strong Republican base. I've said this before. If you go to any native territory, once you leave our territories, you are going to find Confederate flags flying up. You might even find a couple of Nazi flags flying up. I mean, on people's fence posts. I mean, it's really right wing. You're going to find a whole lot of Trump lovers. A whole lot of people, dogging anything even close to a Democrat. I mean, that's their politics. But we're surrounded in every place, including here in Seneca territory. You step off our territories, and you're going to find yourself in Republican strongholds. And it's not enough to change the whole state. But my point in all this stuff is that we aren't going to change those elections. I mean, and again, Seneca Nation, as an example, Seneca Nation, the total population is around 7,000 or 8,000 people. A fairly substantial portion of that number doesn't even live on native territories. They're living in Buffalo or Niagara Falls or wherever, or perhaps even living on another native territory. So by the time you talk about the population that's living on our territories here, you're maybe talking about 4,000 or 5,000 people. Now, that population is divided by Allegheny and Cattaraugus, two separate territories in two different counties. And oftentimes, Cattaraugus steps over to, if we follow the county lines as they want to draw them through our territories, which I reject, we would be surrounded by Erie County, Cattaraugus County, and Chautauqua County. So if we accept the lines that the state tries to draw through our territories about legislative districts, the Seneca population would be sliced and diced into so many different districts they couldn't affect an election anyway. And of course, that's not to mention the fact that the native vote isn't a singular voting block. It's not like all native people vote Democrat or Republican. Honestly, I don't know if you were to take a real poll across native territories. You go to someplace like Oklahoma, I'm not sure how strongly Democratic that native population would be. Even North Dakota. So as everybody's clamoring about, we need to get out the vote because if not, they'll reelect Trump. You know what? There's probably a good 50% of the native population, if they voted, they'd vote for that moron again. I mean, we're kind of detached from all that stuff in many ways. So it's not like our people are the most aware. They aren't the most, voter savvy, I would say. And, frankly, we shouldn't be. It's not our elections, not our president, not our governors, not our, congressmen, not our senators, none of them. And that's where, I say in the opening that we talk about identity, talk about oppression, survival. I hear people say, well, the only way to fix the system is to do it from within. Look, we are such a small population. We're never going to affect any major change in any election. And then when you look at who the people that are up, think about North Dakota. There you go, North Dakota. What were the choices between a Republican and a Democrat in North Dakota? If your choice was Heidi Heitkamp or whoever the Republican is that beat her, I don't know. She was pro Dakota Access Pipeline, as was the Democratic nominee for the presidency. Hillary Clinton. She referred to these pipelines as federal infrastructure projects, not environmental catastrophes. So, as a Native person, who do you vote for that's gonna represent any of our concerns? None of them. None of them represent our concerns. Can I remind people that Barack Obama is the one who advanced the Dakota Access Pipeline? Can I remind people that Barack Obama had a senior policy advisor in the White House, Jody Archambault-Gillette? And that's Dave Archambault's sister, who was the tribal chairman, who was, who was all cozy with Obama, even as they're running a pipeline, through near Standing Rock. So look, my point is, we don't affect their elections anyway. There's never going to be a situation where the Native vote is going to turn a red state blue or a blue state red. It just isn't going to happen. We don't have the numbers. I mean, it's like a placebo. Oh, tell people that, oh, yeah, you're in power. You get a chance to vote. Well, wait a second. So what are we fighting for? When we're talking about Native sovereignty, what are we fighting for? What is that distinction and autonomy? If we're going to go ahead, we're going to, self-assimilate by registering to vote in their elections? I posted that old meme about I just participated in my own oppression by voting. I mean, look, if you vote for whoever, it doesn't even matter if the person you vote for wins. You validated the election. You know what? Every Native person who voted, you participated in Donald Trump becoming the president. It doesn't matter whether you voted for him or not. You validated the process. That crappy process, the Electoral College, the whole bit of it. If you voted, whoever won that election is your president. Now, if you didn't vote, now you can say, look, I had nothing to do with it. I didn't vote for the crappy opponent that ran against him or Donald Trump. And when I hear people say, well, if you voted for Hillary Clinton or if you didn't vote, then you helped elect Donald Trump. That's just plain BS. Simply not true. The system is flawed. So why should we participate in the system? So again, the irony of what's taking place in North Dakota is that while we won't assimilate enough to have house numbers and street names, house addresses, we want to assimilate enough to vote in their elections in a place where a vote wouldn't even matter. I mean, and then when I hear people say, well, there's a few places where it could have swung the vote. Well, you show me the singularly few places where the Native vote would have or did make a difference. And I'll tell you, what you're not counting is how many people voted for the opponent, or the other side. Because I think that if you were to look at Native territories, you're going to find there's just as many people on the left as there are on the right, even if you measure them by American electoral standards. And why? Because we simply don't communicate enough. We don't communicate well enough to assert ourselves not only as a voting bloc. Forget about the voting bloc. We don't assert ourselves strong enough as a as a special interest even, because you don't have to vote. Martin Luther King was not an elected official. Malcolm X was not an elected official. Rosa Parks was not an elected official. You go through all the Native people who are recognizable, I guess, or are these iconic symbols of resistance, I guess. Louis Hall wasn't elected. I mean, I'm just saying, you don't have to be an elected official to make change. In fact, I would say that when you become an elected official, you become part of the process. So why do that? I mean, and then who do you represent when you become an elected official? So I'm not just talking about the people who vote. I'm talking about people who run. So who does Deborah Haaland represent? She represents primarily white people. She can say, okay, I have concerns about Native people, but at the end of the day, when her tenure is all done, and you look at all the stuff she voted for and all the stuff she advocated, you're going to find that she was more just following the Democratic Party line. Sharice David, same thing. And let's not forget, and I keep seeing all these things. Oh, these were the first Native people elected to Congress. No, they weren't. No, they weren't. They're the first Native women elected to Congress. There have been Native congressmen, and you know what? Almost all of them Republicans. In fact, I think there are 2 or 3 Native people, at least claim to be Native people, who are in Congress that are Republicans today. So Hallen and Davids aren't the only Native congresspersons. They're the only 2 women, and they are the only 2 Democrats, I believe. But that they're not the only 2. And why? Because there's plenty of Native people out there who are on the right side of the political spectrum. So, again, I can't state it more strongly that our vote, and I know people don't like to hear this, our vote doesn't matter. We are too small a population to affect any major race. And you know what? If voting was so important to us, we don't even vote that strongly in our own elections. I mean, to the extent that some of those exist. And even if they aren't elections, how active we are in our own local politics. How many people go down to Seneca Nation Council on a weekend, on a weekly basis, or twice monthly? Unless they're giving away something, they don't show up. So, I mean, how engaged are we in any of our own politics, the stuff that really affects us? And if you've got somebody in your community who is a strong, articulate, great voice, somebody who can bring people together, bring minds together, and rally the people and lead the people, why the hell would you want them running for a state office or a federal office? Why would you want to lose that person to the white people? I mean, Paulette Jordan, perfect example. She was on Coeur d'Alene Council. Then she ran for state office. Then she ran for the governorship. And, you know, she wasn't going to win the governorship, but we ended up losing somebody who may have been a good voice for the Coeur d'Alene people. But instead, you know, she runs for governor of Idaho, I guess it was, and she loses, and she lost badly. And of course, she wasn't going to win. Idaho is the 7th whitest state in the United States. They haven't had a Democrat as a governor for almost 30 years. She wasn't going to win. So why? So now she just kind of fades away and, you know, into the sunset here. If she was such a strong voice, then why didn't she do the work for the Coeur d'Alene? Why did she? Because, you know, if she got elected, you know how the only way she was going to get elected was if white people voted for her. Because you know how Deborah Hallen got elected? White people voted for her. You know how Sharice David got elected? White people voted for her. So who do they represent when they get in those offices? They don't represent us. I mean, again, they become part of that system of oppression. The idea of pulling us in. Oh, yeah, I'm your congressman. No, not my congresswoman. Woman or man, you're not mine. Not my president, not my governor, not my senator, not my congressman. And, you know, so this is what I call self-imposed assimilation. And the 3 greatest examples of it are enlisting in the armed forces, because you are giving your body and in some cases your life, or a commitment for your life, to the military industrial complex of the United States. I mean, there's no more ultimate sacrifice of yourself to assimilation than joining the military. And I say that today. Now, I understand that people have a many ways of justifying, you know, past conflicts, and, you know, people who served in, you know, World War I, World War II, you know, Korea, Vietnam. I mean, they all come up with their own ways to justify it. And many of people say, well, WW2 was the last good war. Good war? Really? We're going to call a war a good war? I mean, do you realize how many Japanese were murdered? I'm not talking about soldiers. I mean, atomic bombs dropped on 2 Japanese cities. Don't tell me how good World War II was. You know, so again, so enlisting is one of the almost the ultimate in in assimilation, because you are giving yourself and allowing yourself to be a tool or a pawn in the U.S. military-industrial complex. The other two are either running for office or voting, because there's no requirement for us to vote in their elections, and it's not like there's no upside to it, but there is downside. There is downside to voting, and I'll talk about that a little bit. But again, let me reiterate: there's no upside, because even if we vote and the candidate we voted for wins, the number of votes that we gave to that candidate are so small that they have no obligation to us. We didn't earn some sort of cred with them. They're not going to come back to, oh man, I'm sure glad we got that native vote. Let's take care of those folks. I mean, there's no obligation. I mean, and we don't represent a large enough voting bloc to have sway. And that's why we spend probably billions, certainly millions, but probably billions in lobbying. If you added up all of our native territories, our vote doesn't matter anything. Do our lobbying dollars? Well, we can even argue about how much of a waste that is. Because for all the millions and millions of dollars that gaming tribes and, mining tribes and gas tribes and oil tribes and all these tourist tribes, no matter how many millions of dollars they spend in lobbying, their opponents are spending more. Their opponents are spending more. Doesn't matter how much we spend to lobby for environmental reform or for protections or anything else stuff, our opponents are spending more money. So even that's a waste. But that has more impact than the pitiful amount of people who vote in their elections do. And of course, running for office. As I said, Deborah Haaland isn't going to change things for Indian country, and nor is Sharice David. And if they had a strong value as politicians, they could have represented their people in the communities that they come from. I mean, that's what I say, about Paulette Jordan or anybody else. If you think that, no, I'm not gonna run for tribal council. I'm not gonna, serve my people. I'm gonna go out there and I'm gonna become a state representative, or I'm gonna become a federal representative. Then you just bailed on your people. And don't give me this crap that you're gonna go to the state capitol and you're gonna change things for Native people, or you're gonna go to Washington and change things for Native people. Come on. All right. We're almost at the bottom of the hour, so I'm not going to get into it. I won't get into it just yet on what the downside is. But there is downside, and I want people to understand what that downside is. But before I get there, one of the debates, and I was engaged with a few people on Facebook over this subject, because the story ran about this Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals upholding North Dakota's right to strip voting rights away from Native people, and again, I posted my comment. I said, good, we shouldn't be voting their elections anyway. And then, you get some people, well, they are all Americans. Well, wait a second. First thing, let's talk about the citizenship thing. Because just because they passed the Congress, the Senate and the House passed a resolution in 1924 declaring that we are or could be U.S. citizens, doesn't mean that we are. We have a choice in the matter. They can't strip our nationality away. They can't strip our, that away from us, because honestly, that's a war crime. And I'm not saying that because John Kane says. That's not an opinion. I mean, the international community determined coming out of World War I that the whole idea of stripping away the national character of a people and imposing another national character upon them, that the international community said that's a war crime. Now, they weren't talking about us, of course, but what they're actually talking about is exactly what our people have been going through. So that was in 1913 that they started having this conversation. In 1924, when the United States says, "Oh, we're going to declare all Native people are U.S. citizens," wait a second, we have a choice in this matter. And in fact, when draft notices started going out for World War II, the Six Nations say, "Oh, hell no. You can't draft us. We're not U.S. citizens." They say, "Oh, no, we passed that law back in 1924. Hey, that doesn't apply to us. We didn't agree to that." I mean, we went through this kind of almost silly or extraordinary, depending on how you want to view it, step of having the Six Nations go and declare war against the Axis of the Axis powers, meaning Italy, Japan, and Nazi Germany. And so we did that almost to justify our involvement in those wars. But no, we said no, you can't draft. That's in fact that's still a debate whether our 18-year-olds are required to register for the draft. But just because they passed the law doesn't make it so. And that's the other thing I'll talk about in the second half of the show is anybody who thinks, well, if you got a driver's license, that means you're a U.S. citizen. No, it doesn't. There are plenty of people who aren't U.S. citizens that have driver's licenses. Social security number, same thing. Even a birth certificate. A birth certificate may be a document you can use to prove that you're a U.S. citizen if you claim to be a U.S. citizen. So a certificate of birth and that location of where you're born, that entitles you to U.S. citizenship, but that doesn't make you one. Especially if you're native and you have your own distinct identity and nationality or cultural identity. You don't have to accept that. And you can. So, I mean, I want to be clear here. I'm not saying that we can't be U.S. citizens. I'm not saying that we shouldn't be able to vote. I'm saying we shouldn't vote. We're at the bottom of the hour. We'll take a break. When we come back, I'll talk about more. I'll talk about the downside of it because that's what's being missed in some of this. Talk about that when we come back. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native. All right, thanks for coming back. It's John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native, and again, we're here at August 18th. We're on a special Sunday night. I'm not asking for forgiveness because last night I went out with my wife. We went to a concert last night, so and it is this week. Our anniversary is on Wednesday, so this is our anniversary week. And for those of you who, like myself, have been married for as long as I've been married, you better do more than just buy a card for your anniversary. Otherwise, you're going to be in major doghouse problems. So anyway, this is my anniversary week. So we kicked it off by going to a concert last night. So we moved the show date to today. All right, hey, I want to thank our sponsors. I want to thank Let's Talk Native. Thank our sponsors for Let's Talk Native, Ross and Holly John and the RJE family of businesses. Eric White in ERW Enterprises. I want to thank I've got an anonymous donor in there too, but I got also thank a few individuals who from time to time make a contribution. And I want to thank those of you who listen to the show, those of you who join me on the show. I want to thank those of you who share the program, whether you like my wife, share the show on Facebook group pages as we do the Facebook live stream, or whether you share the podcast, the YouTube video, or whatever. And I do, again, want to strongly encourage people to sign up to our YouTube channel, where I think we're sitting at about, 390 subscribers. We'd like to bump that up over 400 and get that moving. So, again, I want to thank those of you who do, and thank those of you who are subscribed, and encourage more of you to do the same. And look, I also want to thank those of you who contribute with comments. And I during the break, I get a chance to look through some of the comments. And I do want to say that the comment about a P.O. box. The P.O. box is exactly what this whole case is about, because that's what most of the folks on these native territories use for their mailing address. A mailing address is not a residence, is not a physical address. And so what North Dakota is insisting is that if you don't put a physical address down, then your voter registration form will not be approved. So, and this gets to one of the downsides of voting. I mean, and there are more than just one, but the land is one of the issues. I mean, as I live here with my Seneca brothers and sisters here, I would never assume that or be presumptuous enough to say that this land is a part of New York State or the United States. And in fact, I insist the other. And why? I base that opinion on the facts that were listed in treaties like the Canandaigua Treaty. Even though I'm not a big fan of the Canandaigua Treaty, the United States said clearly, the land is yours and we will never claim the same. Well, never means never. And there's never been anything that changed. And don't even bring up the Citizenship Act again, but there's never been anything in the relation between Senecas and New York State or the United States to say, oh, that land is now part of the United States. Since when? It wasn't in 1794, and it wasn't, through most of the 18th and 19th century, until all of a sudden there's this effort to say, oh yeah, they are our people now. Well, wait a minute, when did that happen? And even if you're going to try to claim Native people as subjugated U.S. citizens, where is the event? Where is the document? Where is something that suggests the land became part of New York State or the United States? Because if you vote and you register to vote, you need to put your address down. Now, in North Dakota, they're making it very clear. If you don't put your physical address, we're rejecting your voter registration. I'm not saying that your voter registration would be rejected, say, in New York or in some of these other states. But you know what? They're still asking you to put your address down. Whether they would kick your voter registration or not, I don't know. But if you fill out your voter registration form and you put that you live on the Cattaraugus territory of Seneca Nation, do you realize what you said? What you said is that where you live on Seneca land is part of New York State, because the states run the elections. So you're saying something that we've been saying otherwise all this time. So in order to vote, you list your address as part of the state divisions of electoral legislative districts. So that's what you've done. Now, I'm not saying that if I filled out a voter registration that I somehow have the authority to make Cattaraugus part of New York State. But look at the trend. If more and more of us did it, when does that come back on us? When does at some point the state say, wait a second, all your people, you guys know you're part of New York State. We've got all these voter registration forms. And why is North Dakota insisting? Why isn't a P.O. box good enough in North Dakota? Why is it that they want the physical address? Why would that even matter? Why couldn't they use their banda or their tribal council headquarters for an address? Why can't they just put that it's, whatever native territory they're from? Why isn't that good enough? There has to be a reason. And again, I read the article and they said, well, like this is more about a loss or, an insufficient infrastructure than it is about voter suppression. And I'll bite a little bit on that because we don't represent a large enough vote to even be the target of voter suppression. So there's something else. What is it that any state, North Dakota or any state, what is in their interest if all of us, Native people, now list our homes as part of the state? I mean, if you don't see this as a problem, then you're just not understanding what it is, what the battle for autonomy and distinction and sovereignty is all about. Because we aren't a sizable enough people to be the targets of voters. We're not going to swing an election one way or the other. And nobody really is targeting us, for, to achieve our vote. Look, there's an awful lot of band councils, tribal councils, tribal headquarters that, sign up to, get out the vote. You know why? Because they get grant money. They get a bunch of money from the parties to encourage voter registration. Look, our votes don't matter. But the downside is that we're listing our lands. And again, I can't speak for every other native territory. But what I do know about where I live here, this land is not considered part of New York State. New York State can claim it is, and the federal government can claim it is, but they have no legal standing to say otherwise. Or, to say that that's true. Again, just like we have a choice on whether we consider ourselves U.S. citizens, there could be a choice to be made on whether we consider our land, or in this case, Seneca land, part of the state. Now, I'm not saying it can get transferred as a result of voter registration, but it's that's a bad precedent there. So we end up acknowledging their right to put their lines through our territories, not just county lines and town lines, which are problematic enough. But when that congressman says, I remember, in fact, let me back up. I remember trying to get a hold of a couple of congressmen in the past. I was fighting over the floor tax issue. It took me 40 minutes just to get to a conversation with their gatekeepers because they said, well, are you in our district? And I said, no, I live on the Cattaraugus territory of the Seneca Nation. They said, well, our district includes part of the Cattaraugus. I said, no, it doesn't. I said, your lines stop when they get to it. So no, I'm not. You're not my congressman. I'm not saying that, but you are a congressman and your actions affect what we do. So I'm not going to pretend that these congressmen, these state legislators and these governors and these presidents, I'm not saying that they don't affect us. I'm saying that they're not ours. So we lose this whole argument about our sovereignty, about our autonomy and our distinction. If they represent us, if they are our congressman and our senator, if they are our governor, don't you understand how much that hurts us in our arguments with these guys? We are stronger as a distinct people because we are nothing but a pimple on the butt of a mosquito in their system. In their system, we are insignificant. In ours, we control our destiny. So, to those of you who say, well, the best way to fight them is to fight them from the inside. Like hell it is. There's no way to fight them from the inside. But here's what we can do. Because look, one of the things that get brought up to me was, well, doesn't Elizabeth Warren have a native platform, a specific native platform? Yes, she does. And how do I feel about that? I'm glad she does. They all should. Now, but they shouldn't. I mean, nobody should be delusional enough to think that the reason to have a native platform is because our vote is so important. I'll tell you the reason to have a native platform. Because of all the injustices that exist for Black people and immigrants and refugees seeking asylum and Latinx, Latino, Muslim Americans, people who are not, atheists, gay people, of all those people, of all of the various oppressed peoples in the United States, we are the low-hanging fruit. We're the easiest ones to. I mean, people talk about reparations. We're talking about a population that is small and spread out. We're over so many areas. We would be the easiest people to pursue real justice with. And most societies, and I'm not the one who invented this, but it has been said that a society should be judged by how the most marginalized people are treated in that society. I mean, it's easy to take care of the majority, the squeaky wheels. It's easy to take care of them. It's easy to cater to the rich people, the people with power. But how do you deal with the most marginalized people? Native people, handicapped people. You want to break people down to small groups. How do you deal with the people who are the most oppressed, overlooked? I mean, how you deal with those people? That's a measure of the true integrity of your society. So not only are we a people that the United States could be measured by if they ever did the right thing by us, but we're the easiest one for the ones to do right by us. I mean, look, the United States has clearly benefited from the lands that they screwed us out of. The amount of people they killed, our population that they destroyed. There's all kinds of reasons for reparations, all kinds of reasons for the United States to do right by us. And there's all kinds of just financial justification. And we're the lowest hanging fruit. So by all means, they should all have a platform on Native issues. But again, it's not because we're going to get them elected. It's because it says something about your integrity. Even if it's a bit of a PR stunt. Oh yeah, I care about Native people. I love their culture. Even if it's a bit of a PR stunt, it still says something about your integrity as it relates to real justice, real equality. And I don't mean equality in terms of Americans. I'm talking about life, human beings. Because Native people have never gotten a fair shake from the United States or its predecessors. Never. I mean, even when you no matter what part of history you look at where maybe even a kind word or two were expressed, they're usually loaded somehow. I mean, even Ben Franklin, as he's trying to say, look at the, this unique union that the Six Nations or the Six Nations put together, and how it seems to have been able to withstand the ages. You know what he called us? He called us ignorant savages. Even a group of ignorant savages could put together a union that seems indissoluble. I mean, so even when a compliment is paid, it's like it's an insult. So it really has to be encouraged that these guys have it. I mean, look, Barack Obama was not a good president for Native people. I'm sorry. I mean, I know everybody wants to say, "Oh, Obama, he was the best." Dakota Access Pipeline, even the Keystone XL pipeline, most of that was done during his watch. Now, he didn't necessarily approve it, but it all got built anyway. He didn't do anything to stop any of those pipelines. The only thing he didn't approve was the final connection between across the U.S. Canadian border, and then Trump did that. So all of these things that people think that Obama was such a good president for, most of it wasn't true. I mean, he deported lots of people. He, killed lots of people with drone strikes. He did all kinds of stuff. But he wasn't that great a president. He seemed like a decent father, decent husband. He doesn't have the character flaws that the moron in the White House now has. But, I mean, he set the stage for Trump to finish what got started during his administration, both positive and negative. So none of these guys are really going to do our bidding. And so as Elizabeth Warren puts together, this platform, and she's not the only one. Bernie Sanders has had some positive things to say, to and about Native people. And honestly, and I'm going to tell you, I'm not voting in those elections, and I'm not endorsing any candidates. But I will say that privately, I have my preferences who I'd like to see win. And not because I agree with them on everything. I don't. But there are some people that I think are worse than others. And I think there are some people who have great, that do have integrity, although I don't agree with them. And, and issues related to, Venezuela and Palestine. And these are the areas that I'm always going to be at odds because they all seem to be in the wrong position on most of that stuff. But if you think, one of the things that Warren was pitching was a cabinet level position for Native American affairs. Look, Obama had a senior policy advisor in Kimberly Teehee and then Jody Archambault Gillette, and nothing positive happened. Even when Obama said things like, "Look, I'm issuing an executive order that any decisions made by an executive branch, the executive branch agency or department that has tribal implications, that we must have consultations with the tribes first." And then they didn't do it. So it didn't matter that you had the executive order. And what he said is any policy decision. I got into it pretty good with Jody Gillette, right in Washington, down at the White House. Got into it pretty good with her over the floor tax. And the floor tax was a tax that when they wanted to pass children's health insurance renewal, there was a thing called CHIPRA, Children's Health Insurance Reauthorization Act. This required the Republicans said, well, you got to figure out how to pay for it. So they jacked up the federal excise tax on tobacco. But at the tail end of that law, what they said is they were going to institute a floor tax. So if you had product sitting on your floor, meaning if you were a bonded warehouse or a cigarette manufacturer or whatever else, if you had a bunch of products sitting on your floor that was cleared through the federal excise tax process, paid the old tax, but had not been sold yet, we're going to assess you the tax increase. Well, they actually tried to do that to us. The smoke shops, right here on the territory. The Seneca Nation actually got hit with this thing. So they tried to assess a tax on us after the fact, after we'd already purchased the product, because they were sitting on store shelves, not just warehouse shelves, but store shelves. So I went down and I talked to Jody Gillette at the White House with Ross John and Dakota Snyder. After having met with the congressman's office in the area, Brian Higgins, and the office of Kirsten Gillibrand, I said, look, did you guys plan for this to happen? They said, oh, no, this wasn't supposed to affect you guys. There was no legislative intent for this tax to affect you. So I went there and I talked to Jody Gillette and assured her that if she checked with Higgins and Gillibrand or any of the other senators, that she would find there was no legislative intent for this tax to be imposed upon us. So it was a policy decision. Now, nobody paid the tax, except for the Seneca Nation, which actually got $230,000 seized from an account. I mean, hardly anybody. A few people did. Even here, a few people did. But most people never paid it. It just quietly went away. But they never would come clean and say, you know what? We're not going to do this. They just didn't enforce it. But to tell the exchange really was Well, we're not sure that's a policy decision. What do you mean it's not a policy decision? By definition, that's a policy decision. And there was no consultation. So, again, and I say all of this stuff, and I reiterate this story, because if you think the next elected president, regardless of party, is going to all of a sudden give us some huge consideration, some time, some conversation, because let's keep in mind, the international standard for policies that affect Native peoples is that a free, prior, and informed consent. Free, prior, and informed consent is accomplished. That's the international standard, and that's the minimum standard. Not a mere consultation, not just, oh, yeah, we met with them, and we heard them out, and then we checked the box, and then we went ahead and did what we were going to do anyway. That's the U.S. policy. Well, at least it was under Obama. That doesn't even exist for Trump. And the next president, if they're a Democrat, they may pander to us a little bit. But at the end of the day, we need to have not a congressman, not a cabinet level position. If the Seneca Nation needs to meet with the White House, they should be able to meet with somebody from the White House. They should be able to make clear what their issues are. We have lost statesmanship because the system is so rigged that it doesn't allow us to even participate in it. Now, how did John Kane and Ross John and Dakota Snyder get a meeting with Jody Gillette? It wasn't easy. We had to do a whole bunch of backdoor dealing to make that happen. Because we even got the congressman and the senator to back away from pushing for such a meeting. So, yeah, I don't need another Jody Gillette. I don't need a cabinet level position. Elizabeth Warren, if you give a rat's ass about Native people, then make time for Native people. Don't make a position, because that position is going to be like a Echo Hawk, some guy who's who's already assimilated, who isn't going to. When we meet with some of these guys, these iconic individuals in Indian country, Suzanne Harjo and people like that, you know what they say? Oh no, we should all be voting it. We're Americans. You can't even hear us when we say that we're not Americans. Now, I do want to go back to the beginning of the show, because while it is my opinion that we should not vote in American elections, it is my opinion that when they passed this law in 1924 declaring us U.S. citizens, that wasn't the definitive act. The definitive act has to come from us. Now, it's my opinion, but it's my opinion based on facts. They can't just make us no longer be citizens of Mohawk Nation, Seneca Nation, and I don't even like to use those words, but they can't declare us citizens unless we declare we want to be U.S. citizens. And whether we carry a driver's license, whether we, go to college, or, whatever people think is an act of assimilation. Assimilation is when you say, no, I'm changing my identity. And my identity is now I'm a U.S. citizen. So the idea of forcing us to get a passport to travel, that should be considered a war crime. That's more of that denationalization. Telling us we can't produce our own travel documents to travel. And if you don't agree with this stuff, you cannot agree with it. But you can't disagree with the facts. You can disagree with my opinion. It's my opinion we shouldn't vote in their elections. It's my opinion that based on the numbers, that our votes don't really matter. And I'm sure somebody can come up with one case where the Native vote may have swung a vote one way or the other. But you know what? If it did, that person was probably so centrist in the first place to get elected anyway that it wasn't going to be a big policy change anyway. And what difference does it make? What difference would it have made if North Dakota got Heidi Heitkamp elected again? Think Dakota Access Pipeline wasn't going to get finished? Come on. But we have a choice. And I realize that many Native people have chosen. Look, I can drive down through Cattaraugus here and see plenty of American flags flying out in the front yards, on the mailboxes, not just during holidays, every single day. So I get it. And I don't begrudge or hate or dislike, people who served in the armed forces or who vote in those elections. I just think that this conversation needs to be heard, that there's a different way to look at it, the whole thing. I think it's important that our children not be lulled into the romanticizing of serving in the armed forces. And I think that we should not be selling our lands out or ourselves out by voting in their meaningless elections. I mean, can I remind people that Clinton had like almost 3 million more votes than Donald Trump and still didn't get elected? I mean, the system's a bit of a sham, folks. I have my preferences on who I'd like to see win this next one, but I'm not gonna endorse anybody, and I'm not gonna vote for anybody. I would be willing to have a conversation with any of them. I'd like to ask some tough questions, and I'm not just talking about Leonard Peltier. I'd like to ask some tough questions about our identity. Are any of them prepared to respect the fact that we reject U.S. citizenship? And what would that relationship look like between us as Native people, as Ungwe, and the American government if we're not U.S. citizens? Because we haven't been. We haven't been, even not since 1924. Even after 1924, we still weren't. That's why they keep trying to pass new laws to say so. I mean, look, they passed the 14th Amendment. That didn't turn us into U.S. citizens. They passed the Indian Citizenship Act. That didn't turn us into U.S. citizens. They passed the Indian Reorganization Act, and that didn't turn us into U.S. citizens. How do I know? Because you can find them saying, well, we're not sure if Native people were under U.S. jurisdiction in 1934. Well, clearly your laws didn't place us under. You admit it. In fact, you use that as a reason not to prevent us from acquiring lost lands. Anyway, folks, look, it is that season where we're going to get back into the next election cycle. As the race for the White House and the elections all take place in 2020. We're beginning that cycle. Native people are going to be courted. We're already hearing about the possibility of some sort of debate or forum, a native being put up by Native people to have these presidential candidates, Democratic candidates, come in to talk about Native policy. Look, let's have the conversations. Let's let them know where we stand. But let's not, this isn't about whether we vote for them or not. And let's not get lulled into it. If you vote, you vote. If you think you're an American and you claim American citizenship, then that's fine. But that doesn't mean that we all do. And you can't say because you made that decision that I don't have that choice anymore, or because I have a driver's license, I don't have that choice anymore. It's absurd. So anyway, thanks for listening. We'll be back here on Tuesday, and we'll see what pops up by then. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native. We'll see you then. Thank you. Yahweh.